did you manage to catch an interview that
Jude Cornett
did recently on Flesh and Bad?
Oh no, I didn't. I don't know what Flesh and Bad is. You have to tell me about this.
Hey everyone, welcome back to more Flesh and Bad, or should I say Flesh and Good, because we are joined today with Jude Cornett, who is the highest placing Zen at the Portland Calling. And he's here today to talk about all things Zen, his deck list, and then kind of some future plans for, I guess, Flesh and Blood related things. So Jude, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jude Cornett. I've been playing Flesh and Blood for coming up on almost 2 years now. And I played Zen and did really well at the most recent calling.
Nice. So Jude, this is actually your second interview on the channel. Do you want to tell us what happened to the first one?
Yeah, so we tried to record this a couple days ago, and we got through the whole interview. It was really great. And then about an hour after finishing it, Aurora sent me a message and said, so funny thing about that, we lost all the audio.
And Jude, why don't you introduce yourself? Yeah.
So
we did not do a
this is
test
take
run.
2,
Yeah. So.
but I'm happy to be here again.
Yeah. So I do feel bad. If anyone's watching this, we do owe Jude at least 1 or 2 hunted packs when that comes out. So next time we see you, you're entitled to that as per our lawyers. But let's go on to, I guess, kind of like some of your stats. So you're actually like stupidly high on 90-day XP. I've heard you've been slipping a little.
Yeah, I go to a lot of armories. I've basically been going to 2 to 3, and sometimes like in the summer when I don't have school, like 4 armories even a week. And generally at the local level, I perform pretty well. So I'm definitely up there in 90-day for sure.
Yeah, you're a menace when it comes to the cold foils. I know I have many times met you in the finals and been robbed. Jude, historically, you've been kind of like a Dromai player. You've also done a lot of Betsy gameplay. I guess walk us through some of your like historically like favorite decks and like what you generally like to play.
Yeah, so definitely my favorite deck of all time was Dromai. When I started playing around the beginning of February 2023. The first the first armory I ever went to was a draft armory, but my first CC deck was Dromai. And basically from then up until she LL'd, about a year later, Dromai was basically the only deck that I played. I qualified for my first national championship with Dromai. I qualified for my first Pro Tour with Dromai. I qualified for my second Pro Tour with Dromai.
Yeah.
Basically, Dromai was like the deck that I would play for CC for the entire time that she was legal, and she'll always have a special place in my heart for sure.
Yeah, not doing so great in LL, obviously, but you know.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, but once she gets a reprint, you know, she's gonna be great. Yeah, you're also a Betsy menace.
Yeah, I love Betsy. Unfortunately, she was like, I actually thought she was pretty good during heavy hitters meta, but she's kind of just gotten worse as new sets have come out. I played her right when heavy hitters came out for a couple months. I actually won the first Fab Foundry City series with her, which unfortunately is not LL points. There's only been one person who's ever gotten LL points with Betsy, but hopefully with Hunted, maybe a little bit less arcane damage in the format, maybe Betsy will come back into relevant. Maybe some more MST heroes LL, you know.
Cool. So you also played Zen in the most recent calling. So tell us kind of like why you picked Zen. I know you're also kind of like a pretty big Enigma fan. I think I dropped a couple games to you on Enigma as well. So kind of walk us through, I guess, why Zen over Enigma and kind of like what made you do that choice.
Yeah, so basically the reason why I chose to play Zen, the 2 decks that I was looking for in this calling were between Zen and Enigma. I think in general, MST heroes are really strong right now, and the other top decks like Aurora and Viserai don't really click with me as much, so it was mostly between Zen and Enigma. And I basically ended up deciding to play Zen a couple weeks before the tournament, just because I felt like other than Enigma, the entire meta is a lot of aggro decks right now. And while Enigma definitely does have the tools to beat these aggro decks, it's not as easy as playing against like a Guardian or a Brute or for example, which have been kind of pushed out because Enigma is so good. And I also felt like Zen has a lot of tools to play anti-aggro, where Zen state is very powerful into a lot of these aggressive mirrors, as well as like Traverse, etc. And so he has a lot of tools effectively to be good into a lot of decks in the meta right now.
Yeah, he does have like a really good, nice mid-range plan where you can kind of swap between like more offensive package, more defensive package. That's why I kind of like him right now. At least a little bit more so than like LL, where he's like just pure combo. But yeah, let's kind of talk through, I guess, some of your choices. So here I have the equipment pulled up. Again, pretty standard equipment suite. Anything to kind of remark on here? I guess AB1 is probably the most interesting thing.
Yeah, not too much. Basically, my thought with AB1 is you can run AB3. I think in general, you don't even necessarily want AB3 into like Verdant Cecilio, so it's really just for Kano.
Yeah.
I think that if you look at the calling, there were like 3 or 4 Kanos in the entire calling of almost 400 people.
Yeah.
And so on average, I'm going to play against 0 Kanos.
Right.
Unfortunately, that was not what happened. But
Yeah.
in general, I felt like with how Zen is kind of a little bit more mid-rangey now, even if you run AB3, I felt like I was unfavored into Kano.
Right.
And so I was basically, I would rather commit those slots to something else rather than play more AB into a matchup that I felt was unfavored, even if I did run a higher amount of AB.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I do think that it's pretty close to like 50-50 if you run like AB3 Spellvoid 1 or sorry, AB3 Spellvoid 2 or whatever.
Yeah, I think if you run the Needle, Arcane Lantern, and
Yeah.
then AB3 and arms and
Yeah.
legs, and then you also run Spellvoid 1, I think it's pretty close. I
Yeah.
think Kano still has a little bit of an edge just because Zen's a little bit slower now.
Right.
Just because like there's a massive difference between the games where you get to transcend on turn 1 or 2 and the games that you don't. I definitely I didn't feel like I had the space to give 2 slots, let alone like 3 for the additional spell void, etc. And that would require me to run a needle and arcane lantern, so it'd be I think 1, 2, 3, 4. It'd be 5 slots in that
Right.
case. Although I would get a needle, so the second one is only 1 slot. But either way, I felt like I didn't particularly want to run needles in my deck, and so if I'm not running needles, then I have to commit more slots if I want to run that higher amount of arcane and spell void. And again, I'm gonna play against 0 Kanos on average.
Yeah. Exactly.
Unless like Majin Bay goes crazy or something, and
Majin. I think he's
yeah.
on new. But anyways, yeah. I think that you pretty much nailed it on the head. Like new with COIB new being kind of like one of the bigger threats in the format. I think that giving a bunch of like sideboard slots to equipment is generally not worth it. And Zen already has like one of the best equipment suites in the game, just by like these 5 cards. So yeah, makes a lot of sense. Let's kind of move on to kind of like the core of the deck. So this is kind of like I want to just say like the stock standard Zen stuff, but some of these are like kind of a little bit interesting choices. Anything to kind of remark on here? I think blue pouncing key is probably the biggest thing to note, but there are a couple
blue pouncing key was in the Osaka list. Basically the main reason why I like it is it's a combo card. It says block 3, and it can enable transcend if you still have pouncing paws up, which generally if you haven't transcended you'll still have your pouncing paws up in a lot of games. The other things that are a little bit interesting about the list is 1 cosmic.
Right.
Basically, it was just a consideration. I wanted to have more sideboard space, and so rather than running both of the cosmics in my sideboard, I decided, okay, in a lot of aggro mirrors, I'm going to run 1 cosmic, which is 1 more brick off of like my E-strikes or whatever.
Right.
But I think I'm okay making that trade-off because that additional sideboard space will help me in other matchups, and it's a marginal downside into for being forced to run 1 basically.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like I think you can pretty safely get away with like 1 cosmic, but maybe like 2 or 3 gets kind of close in terms of like clunking up your deck. Like mainly with like levels and E-strike, I think it's kind of a little bit clunky. Yeah, so these are kind of like the usual suspects. Let's kind of talk, I guess, about sideboard cards. Although I think E-strike is kind of more like a main deck card for you.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely more of a main deck card. I think E-strike kind of comes out in some of the hyper aggro mirrors where it's like you don't necessarily have time, like in those matchups I'm not running spinning wheel kick, and so a lot of the best lines with E-strike is when you can bottom a tiger. Like for example, if you activate Zen, you get a spinning wheel kick or you get 100 wins. You play out all your attacks, and at the end of your turn you have an E-strike and a tiger in your hand. You can just go E-strike, draw a card. In matchups where I'm not running spinning wheel kick, or some matchups I'm not even running 100 wins, although I think that's a bit more questionable, but I like it because of the D-React package, which we'll talk more about later. But in those matchups where I'm not running the cards that have base go again, I think it's a lot worse because a lot of your best lines are ball tiger to E-strike, in my opinion.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit more, I guess, about the kind of defensive package. So you had about 8 D-Reacts in your deck and Tiger Eyes, which are pseudo D-Reacts, kind of. Kind of walk us through this defensive package.
Yeah, so basically, this is kind of more like a macro strategy of Zen, but in general, in games, when you're transcending with Zen, you're going to be winning. And what I was finding is that in matches where I wasn't able to transcend early, I would often lose in aggro mirrors because I would throw my go again damage at them. I would throw my spinning wheel kicks or my mauling keys, or I go like Kakara mauling key or Kakara 100 wins mauling key, etc. But it's just not as good as the damage that these other aggro decks can output,
Yep.
whether that be Aurora with all her 0-for-4s, or Viscera with all his rune chants, etc.
Right.
And so what I was finding is that in order to try and make these matchups more consistent, I would rather board in more 3 blocks and 4 blocks, and then board out a lot of my 2 blocks. And so I will often be getting behind. Like, for example, if Aurora's getting 4 value of every card, and I'm getting 3 to 4 value, I will be falling a little bit behind, especially if they're getting on hits through or whatever. But a lot of the on hits I can cover with Sync Below or Flick Flag or whatever. And then when I finally do get to transcend, in my opinion, Zen has some of the best numbers in the game when he is transcending, and so most of the time I felt like if I can get to the point where I do start transcending, I'm going to be able to win those games even if I'm a little bit behind, just because of how powerful Traverse is, how powerful all my equipment is, and how powerful just like sending a lot of small attacks for 2 and 1 are, between Kakara, Scratching Tigers, etc.
Right. I think this defensive package also really helps into like a lot of decks like new, where like CYB new, you have a lot more agency to kind of like choose when you're blocking versus not blocking, and kind of respond to reactions and stuff. Let's talk a little bit, I guess, about Tiger Eye, because Tiger Eye is a card that I think.
Oh yeah, Tiger Eye is a little bit of a weird one. So the thing about Tiger Eye is block cards inherently are a lot worse than defense reactions, because A, you have to play them in the defense steps, so you don't get the ability to play around defense reactions or like wait to block, etc. And in addition, most block cards you can't defend with them from your arsenal. However, Tiger Eye is the only block card that you can defend with from your arsenal, which is really good for several reasons. For one thing, I think it kind of fundamentally changes how you have to play around disruption. Obviously, this isn't as big in a lot of the aggro mirrors and the matchups where I really want to be running Tiger Eye. Like, for example, into Enigma, who's sending a lot of CNCs at you, you're not necessarily running Tiger Eyes if you can help it. But it fundamentally does something different from what most defense reactions do, which is that it doesn't get stuffed by CNC. Additionally, as a yellow pitch, it's not a blue, so you can't transcend off of it, although you're not running any blue D-react, so you couldn't do that anyway. And then in addition, the Tiger is quite often going to be between 1 and 3 value. And so if you think about it at its base, if it's a yellow 4 value, that's probably still a little bit worse than Sync Below, because Sync Below can dig you towards Transcend. But if you're able to use it to enable a chase line, it's often going to be better than Sync Below, because 6 value on one card is just very good. And in addition, with all the 3 blocks that I have in the deck, if you're able to put like a Tiger Eye and a 3 block from hand on a CNC, when you are forced to block, being able to generate additional blocking value out of your cards is really good.
Yeah, I think Tiger Eye also just enables a lot of like the good combo cards in the deck, like Pouncing Keys. So like it often not only gives you like plus 1 or plus 2 value off like a Tiger Swipe or something, but it also basically gives you an action point as well. So kind of a deceiving card. Like it seems bad on paper because it's a card that you have to block with, and then if you're like ahead, it's like, oh well, I can't do anything with this. But the numbers on the card are just like stupidly good.
And in addition, in that kind of scenario, in matchups where you're ahead and you draw a lot of defense reactions, which can happen because in the aggro mirrors you are running a lot of defense reactions. That's kind of what E-Strike is for a little bit. And then in addition, it being a yellow pitch means that at the very least you can put it into Kakara. And if you're already able to make a Tiger on that turn, that's just your 3 value right there. It's not ideal, but I think it makes up for it by helping you when you're behind, and still being passable when you're ahead, which is I like flexible cards for sure.
And then also on the board, I guess we have like one more Cosmic just to kind of shore up a little bit of the CYB matchup. And then Warmongers, which is just like one of the dumbest generics in the game. Like, stupidly good card.
It doesn't transcend, but it does everything else you want for the deck. Block 3, blue pitch.
0 cost.
0 cost fundamentally. It just like shuts off Viscerai and Azalea a lot of the time. They have ways around it, but not that many. Warmongers can like be the easiest like 1 card 8 you've ever seen in your life, which is just ridiculous.
And I think that's kind of one of Zen's strengths, which is just you get to run like 12 of the best generics in the game for basically no cost. Like whereas Dio, for instance, like you would have to make like concessions with your whole deck to like run these.
Yeah, or like Viscerai, he definitely doesn't want to run non-Rune Blade cards if he can help it. Ninja just like generally uses generic cards really well. because they have like a lot of these cards cost a lot of action points, and Ninja generally has a lot of action points. Where if all of your attacks have Go again, it's very easy for you to play all of your cards that have Go again because they're Ninja cards, and then end your turn on these incredibly efficient cards that are action point costly, but that cost is offset because you have so much Go again in your deck.
Right. I think that pretty much covers kind of like the sideboard and the deck itself. Are there any other cards that we kind of forgot about or want to mention?
Not really. I think Wax Off is sneaky good into Aurora as well. If they ever send an E-Strike at you, it's really good. If they ever Electrostatic Discharge something, it's really good.
Yeah.
If they ever Lightning Press, that's a little bit more situational because
Right.
generally they're not going to Lightning Press something that you're already overblocking with Wax on or whatever, but it's still you can kind of get them with it a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it's also just like one card covering a Snatch, one card covering a Leave No Witnesses.
Right.
It's all very good.
Yeah.
In general.
Wax on itself is very, very strong. One notable, I guess, exclusion that we're going to talk about a little bit later is Wax Off, which we do not have on our list, which I think is still pretty good, especially if you have a lot of Auroras like the Calling did. But I think that there are some concessions you have to make if you want to main deck it that are generally not worth it.
I think in general for Wax Off, the main thing that I was finding is the only ways that I was losing to Auroras is if they're able to get really good Exude Confidences off against you.
Right.
And so cards like Wax Off, just like having even more defense reactions in your deck against Aurora, even having 8 feels like kind of a lot if your opponent is on the full like 2 or 3 Exude Confidences.
Right.
I think Wax Off is good, but I wasn't finding it to be particularly great in any matchup other than Aurora, and I was already finding that these cards help me in other matchups other than Aurora, as well as I still felt like I was beating Auroras, even if Wax Off might have been a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go, I guess, into your kind of results. So actually, before we kind of talk about results, I guess what kind of matchups did you kind of like practice before the calling, and I guess like what did you have any kind of like findings through practice that kind of like influenced, I guess, your deck building?
Yeah, so generally what I was finding in my practice for the calling is Zen Mirror is a coin flip. I felt like I didn't get as much Viscerai practice as I would have liked, but I felt like Aurora was quite favored unless you didn't see Transcend cards early and they had a series of like very powerful turns early, which kind of was true in my games as well. Other decks, I found that Enigma was pretty favored. I think they can definitely high roll you. If you don't transcend early and they do transcend early and they're able to have a big pivot turn with reverse or mirror guy or whatever, it can definitely be sketchy. But a lot of the time, Pouncing Paws can, paired with Kakara, can threaten ward pretty effectively.
Yeah.
And if you transcend in the first like 2 turns, I think you're like 80+% to win those games most of the time.
Yeah.
Like it's very. You have to like draw a hand that Traverse doesn't fix, which is like really hard because Traverse fixes a lot of hands. And then other than that, I felt like New was unfavored but winnable. I would say the biggest thing that I felt in my testing was just that it felt like a lot of the time if I was fat decking into New, I was running like not quite enough blues, but the matchup still felt good enough considering that it's our worst matchup other than like Kano. So we played a bunch of Zen Mirrors. We basically came to the conclusion that it was a coin flip. I think we like played 5 games and one of us went first 3 times, one of us went second, or one of us went first 2 times, and the person who went first 3 times won 2 games, and the person who went second.
Yeah, something like that.
Basically, the amount of games that we went second were the number of games that we won, because going second and transcending early just matters so much in the Zen Mirror that even if you run tech for it, it doesn't particularly matter.
I think you were running Weakest Link at the time, and then I was trying out like Censor for like weird mirror breaker tech, or like Wax on Wax Off. I think even too. Like, I don't think it really mattered a whole lot, at least in our
basically because you're supposed to play around CNC, that means that you also end up playing around Weakest Link and Censor as well. So it doesn't matter as much. I think having more copies of CNC is like fine, but because Weakest Link isn't actually that great into Aurora because they only have like 6 or 9 targets for it, which is like less than Zen had when he was at full power, but especially because it's less of a big deal if they Weakest Link like an Electrostatic Discharge. It's still good, it's like 9 value, but it's a lot less good than like taking a Transcend card out of Zen's hand, because that's like his whole game plan is basically transcending. So yeah.
Let's go back to results. So we're gonna kind of go through kind of each day and kind of walk through some kind of the highlights. So your first day, I don't want to talk about all the games because you do a really good job on your channel, kind of going through like each individual matchup and like what all happened. But kind of walk us through some of the highlights. So to me, I think that watching some of your games, the biggest highlights are probably like the Betsy game, like the new game, as well as like the Kano that you had on stream.
Yeah, I think the Bolton game was also pretty interesting.
Right.
But I'll try to go pretty brief because
Yeah.
I made a video on my own channel. I made a full tournament report.
Yeah.
I go pretty in depth there.
Yeah.
But I'll talk about it a bit
Just
as
at
well.
a high level, yeah.
Yeah. I think the Betsy game was pretty interesting. In general, I think Betsy is a pretty good matchup for Zen. Just Guardian in general can be a struggle with Victor, but a lot of the time because Betsy wants to utilize. So I will also note, as someone who plays a lot of Betsy, it was interesting because I know a lot of how Betsy functions,
Yep.
which is a lot different from I think a lot of people who play Zen against Betsy.
Right.
Basically, because Money Warrior Mouth is a Nothos and other Nothos plays are some of Betsy's best plays, that means that she's running Tectonic Plating, which
Right.
means that if she's running Tectonic Plating, she's not running Tunic, which means that she can't CNC pummel you as efficiently.
Right.
She can still do it off of Mights and Vigors, which is really good, but
Not as
in
often.
general, they're less disruptive and a lot more tanky.
Right.
In addition, basically to hedge, I just put a bunch of my defense reactions in, but in general, I was able to output enough damage where I wore through their armor, and at the point that Betsy has to start blocking with like 3 cards,
Yep.
she's not particularly happy. Once Betsy's only swinging hammer, and you're not like fully utilizing your might and your vigor, a lot of the time you can kind of pull ahead as Zen because their hands are usually like 13-ish value a hand, and Zen, if he's transcending often, is like 16 with the spike turn that is like traverse and pouncing paws, etc.
Right. Exactly.
So that game it was a fun game for sure. It was my opponent was pretty happy that I knew how Betsy worked because
Yeah.
they said it played the day before on the Friday. Most of their opponents literally didn't know how Betsy worked.
Right.
Which is I wish Betsy was better.
It's a shame.
But
Beautiful hero.
Okay. As for the new game, I think the new game was pretty interesting. I think it was against a local of mine, Matthew. He plays new. He's beaten me like far too many times.
He's also beaten
like
me like twice,
yeah,
I think.
like I played him like 5 times, and I think I've beaten him like literally once.
Yeah.
We don't play like super often, but he comes in for like the pro quest and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I think he's beaten me the last like 3 or 4 times we played in pro quest,
Yep.
and then in the calling. New Zen, pretty difficult matchup. What I do is I board into 65 cards, and I cut levels and Biting Breeze. There's an argument to cut 100 wins instead of Biting Breeze, but I like it for the combo count. I think generally it's just you really don't want to have levels in your deck against new because if they can get like 1 to 2 levels into your banish zone, they can just go absolutely crazy, and output like 25 plus damage in 1 turn.
Yep.
I think I misplayed pretty badly in this game. I think the biggest point in which I misplayed is they 1 turn they send Beckoning Misplayed at me. I don't think I have a defense reaction arsenal. Maybe I have like a Crouching Tiger or something. Pitching a Levels of Enlightenment with 3 more cards in hand and an arsenal. And because they have another levels in their hand, I'm thinking, or because they pitched levels, I'm thinking they have another levels in their hand.
Exactly.
And I'm at a life total where I don't want to give them like a free 1 card 5 and like filtering with levels. And so after thinking about it for a bit, probably not as much as I could have, but thinking about it for a bit, I block with Pouncing Paws, and then they immediately blow me out with Siren Skull and get quite a bit ahead. And then I think there was one other point that game where I maybe didn't get the best Pouncing Paw usage that I could have. I think I used it to enable a Transcend when I still had like 2 chases left in deck, but it was like the Transcend was like kind of middling because I had already blocked like a Saya or something like that. I don't remember 100%. The details are somewhat fading, but overall the game was like pretty close. I was like kind of bringing it back, and he sends like a Bonds of Agony at me with like 2 cards in hand, still has like boots up, and I have no D-Reacts in hand, so I just have to block as much as I can. He has a Just a Nick, and that was it pretty much. My other games weren't particularly interesting. I think the Bolton game was actually really interesting. So my Bolton opponent was going for a very kind of patient game plan. What they were doing is they were just kind of blocking a lot of my attacks very efficiently, sending like 2 card 7s with the Bolton ability, which is very difficult to block, and then they were using Sync Belows to send their Luminous to the bottom.
Yep.
And so they weren't trying to set up a double Lumina or a triple Lumina turn. They were basically just trying to chip me down to the point where in endgame they could have good value turns where they're like, play an attack, Lumina, swing, or whatever, and just kind of outvalue me that way because they were playing around me not being able to block. So instead, I was just trying to put all my defense reactions in my list. And so what that meant is that they were sending like 2 card 7s at me, and I would just like block with 2 defense reactions or like a Tiger Eye and a Sink Below or whatever. And so I was keeping my life total really high. And I eventually actually fatigued them because they got all 3 Luminas off, but I didn't end up taking that much damage because my Flick Flax, I think I had 1 Flick Flack line up with a Lumina, and then I don't think I made a Zen state, but I was able to block with like some non-attack actions. And so I was barely able to fatigue them just by like I continually sent like 2/1/2. Not like I had literally no combo cards left in my deck, but I was definitely getting down to it. I think I had like maybe 10 to 15 cards left in my deck, and like 6 or 7 of them, like most of them were chi. So I think I had like 1 combo card left in my deck when I ran them out of cards.
Oh, interesting.
So that was a really cool game.
Yeah.
And then my last game of the day was against Kano on stream. It's on the
normally
FabTCG
pretty
YouTube
hard
channel.
matchup, right?
Very, very hard matchup. Basically, I sat down for my opponent. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be 5-2. We're
Yeah.
gonna have to win out tomorrow. And it was a weird game for sure. They might have missequenced, but like looking back at the game, they turn 0 Kano a couple times, don't find any potions, pass.
Right.
And then they drop their hand, and they have Wildfire and Arsenal, 2 blues and 2 Kindles.
Yeah.
And I think I probably would have presented Spellfire Cloak instead of Tunic, so just because I think that matchup can like end really quickly.
Right.
But I think if I've played some Kano myself as well.
Yeah.
I think I probably would go off there as well, especially since I went all the way down to 2 resources and no ability to make a Zen state.
Right.
It's like pretty reasonable that they can put me to like sub 10. And if they can put me to sub 10, it's definitely worth it. They ended up mismathing a little bit. They activated Crucible when activating Crucible would mean that they couldn't play their Floodgates afterwards, which was
right.
definitely rough for them. It was like probably a difference of like 20-ish damage.
Right.
But even if they had not activated Crucible, then the Wildfire only comes in for I believe it would have come in for 6, AB1 down to 5.
Right.
And I'm at 4. I'm at literally 40. So
Yeah,
I definitely
pretty hard to kill.
yeah, like basically the only way they kill me that turn is if they hit another Floodgates off the Floodgates, or like they hit 2 blues off the Floodgates, Kano hit another Floodgates, and then find like another spell, or they hit like exactly another spell and then Blazing. So,
Yeah.
I think that game was interesting. I think one interesting, like you don't really have a lot of decisions in the Kano, but I think one interesting decision that I ended up making was, I put them into lethal range. They had to block with a card or 2, so I'm like, okay, they're not killing me this turn. And I decide to IP a Chi in my hand because basically the only way that I can lose from this point is if I draw like a hand that's just like a full brick. And so Chi, like IPing a Chi basically just guarantees that I, rather than like making a Zen state or whatever, because they're not going to send anything at me on their turn, I just hold the Chi to make sure that I have enough damage to at least take their whole hand the next turn. And then if I have them in a blocking pattern, you almost always get there from that position as Zen, just because of all the 2s and the 1s you send at them.
Cool. So yeah, that was day 1. Pretty awesome job going 6-1. Let's kind of go through day 2. So only loss was into Aurora, and then 4 pretty impressive wins to kind of close out the day. Your Aurora loss was also local, wasn't it?
Yeah, I played against Sadat, another local of mine. Overall, the game went okay. Basically, I think the main point of the game was I made a Zen state, and it only ended up getting I think 5 or 6 value.
Right.
When at that Chi would have been at least 4, and then the Kasai would have been at least like 2 just on block later.
Right. So not a high value Zen state.
Yeah, definitely you want to get more out of your Zen state if you can. Like if he has an Arc Lightning or whatever, he basically is forced to Arsenal that Arc Lightning, not play it on the future turn, and then on the next turn, try and connect with something like that. But other than that, the rest of my games went pretty well. I played against Guy Cohen on Prism round, I think it was 11. Yeah, it's the second to last round of Swiss. It was a really interesting game. I didn't get a ton of practice into Prism, but basically the overall strategy is you just board out all your 2 blocks and run a bunch of defense reactions because almost all Prisms are on Rapture nowadays, especially into Zen for sure. And so if they're not hitting with their first Herald, they're not doing much.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless they have like exactly a 5-card hand. and they have soul, which they're not getting a lot of soul if you're not letting them
Blocking.
hit with heralds.
Yeah.
Generally all they're gonna do is send like 6 into 6.
Right.
And if you're able to, if they're not able to get a lot of value on their angels because you're just like chipping them down with Kakara and tigers and stuff like that,
Yep.
and they're not drawing their that all you got, which Key did in that game, it ended. It's usually goes pretty well for you. I think one big point that game was he chose to Halo turn 1 because he was trying to get a snowball going.
Right.
Where it's like you get the 1 soul from the Halo. If you hit with the second Herald, that means that you can immediately grab Soraya, flip, and then swing, draw 2 cards, and then send another Herald, and then get an Arsenal because you have a Ponder, etc.
Right.
But he wasn't able to hit with the Herald on that turn because I had a defense reaction set in Arsenal. And then on the next turn, because he had already used Halo for Judgment to turn my card that I Zen for face down,
Right.
I was able to double transcend off of Sacred Art and then grab Chase and get quite a bit ahead in life.
Yeah.
And then I kind of just held the lead from there.
Right. Makes sense. I think D-Reacts into Prism is kind of like counterintuitive from how you played it in the past, or like because normally they're on like Tome of Divinity or whatever, but since the ban, you don't really have to worry about auras as much. Is what I found.
Yeah, a lot of prisms aren't even on Arclight Sun, or not all prisms, but especially into like Zen, it can be really punishing if they block with Traverse and then you Arclight them.
Right.
But because of the way that the Rapture builds are set up nowadays, you have like 15 blues in your deck.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's most of the time Arclight is going to be like 3 cards or like pitching 3 cards.
Yeah.
And so 4 cards to take your opponent's turn is not particularly good, especially when you're not often going to be able to line up with Soraya because most of the time Soraya dies the turn that the turn after you play it because they really are trying to deal with that and not let you draw like multiple instances of 2 cards as the
Yeah.
prism.
And I think, like you mentioned, blocking out the first Herald is like very, very important in that matchup, just to starve soul, and it makes it so you can't like attack with the Angel the same turn that they hit with the Herald, right?
Yeah, unless they have like a really large hand for sure.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think other than that, the CYB new game was interesting. I played against Victor Mercado, who spoiler alert, I play again in Top Cut.
Yeah.
He was on CYB new. He was 11-0. So he basically looking at the top tables, he had already beaten everyone else at the top tables.
Right.
So I was
Yeah.
like the next person down at X and 2.
Yeah.
I played against him in a side event on Friday. I think the CYB new Zen matchup is really interesting. I do agree that I think it's easier than the
Normal,
regular new matchup,
Yeah.
but it definitely can be sketchy because CYB is the kind of deck that takes advantage of your opponent's deck like not fully functioning
Right.
properly.
Yeah.
Like if you draw like 1 or 2 brick hands, the next thing you know they're up like 15 life and
Yeah,
it's really
exactly.
difficult to kill them. That was not what happened this game. I basically I double transcended on turn 1 and then did not let up the gas from there.
Yeah.
I think I killed him before he resolved all his CYBs.
Right.
It was not a super close game. Although I do think he banished like a cosmic off, or I think he banished both my cosmics off the top.
Oh, really? Nice.
But it just like didn't matter because like
You
he
just
would
had
like
so much
play,
tempo.
yeah, he would like play a CYB and then I would just deal 15 more damage to him and
Right.
it would like offset the CYB really nicely.
Yeah. It's so impressive that you got him at least in Swiss. That deck.
Yeah,
Was
it
very,
was
very
only
scary.
lost in Swiss, which was really cool. And then a little bit of spoilers for the top cut, but he only lost one other time in top cut.
Yeah, exactly. And then let's talk about, I guess, the top 8. So, Sandscour Azalea, you got to win in. This is actually kind of funny because one time I was talking to you that I almost got fatigued by Azalea, and I tried to explain that it was like Sandscour Azalea, because you weren't believing that I like actually was almost at fatigue. But that game was pretty close. I don't
That
think it
game
was.
was pretty close.
Yeah.
I think because they were almost out of buffs, I would probably end up fatiguing them before they would.
Right.
But it's definitely interesting because like all of their cards are worth 3, and if you're blocking for 3 a lot, they can definitely sit on the game with like Red and Ledgers and stuff like that. And then
Yeah.
Seek and Destroy takes cards out of a deck. Judge Your Executioner takes a lot of cards out of deck. And then in addition, they're just sending a lot of 5s at you.
Right.
And so if you're blocking for 3, they're just getting more value per card, although they don't have a real weapon. So
Yeah.
this game was really interesting. Basically, I leak 6 turn 0 because I draw levels transcend and then just arsenal the card that I drew off levels, which was a transcend card, which was really good. And then on turn 1, they send a big attack at me. I give traverse. I send like 30 more at them with Sacred Art.
Yeah.
And then they like kind of put me in the grinder of just like disruption every turn.
Yeah.
And I just like block for like I think it was like 8 or 9 turns.
Yeah.
And then I had like one more push turn, and then I was on the last turn of the game, I get there with grain that tips the scale.
Yeah.
Which they
was-
couldn't particularly play around, but that game was stressful for sure because it's like the way that I was kind of opening myself up a little bit to lose with blocking with all my armor really early because once I'm out of armor, because they're a disruption deck, they can kind of they
Just
don't
keep
need to
doing it
care
every
about
turn.
sending like 11 dominate every turn. If they just send 5 dominate every turn, I can't block it, and they can like just like block out whatever attack like one attack I sended them.
Yeah.
That's like their next goal. But I felt like getting that far ahead on life would give me so many more like options, and it's really setting me up to punish them if they brick. Like if they have one turn where they don't have good disruption, because I'm up so much life, I can afford to take it and then send back really like just with whatever I have pretty
Yeah.
much.
I was watching that game, and you were up like 30 or something life, like very, very early on, and
Yeah, I think it was like 40-16 or something like
yeah,
that.
like very, very like resoundingly, but you did have to use all your armor, so it was a little bit scary from there. Just like basically what the deck does is like Memorial Grounds, Red and Ledger, like or just like dominates random Red and Ledgers off the top.
Or yeah, I think they literally played like 8 red in the ledgers that game.
Yeah,
'Cause
exactly. So
they
basically, you're
every
getting
codex.
time locked every turn.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a position where the Easter eggs can be pretty good as well because
Yeah.
if they are restricting you to one action and that one action is 7, which is generally more than what Ninja can do, like usually do,
Yeah.
that's pretty nice as well.
Yeah, Easter Egg's very, very good in Roselia.
It's very modal, yeah, for sure.
And then the CYB new rematch was pretty tough to watch. Again,
That game was brutal.
yeah,
I turn 0, I like go to filter, and they play a CYB on my first turn, and
Yeah.
then the next like 4 turns they play like 3 more CYBs.
yeah, just
So
brutal.
I didn't get them below 40 until like turn 6 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I like clawed it back pretty well. I ended up losing by 1 point, which I am not the most happy about because I watched the game back a couple times, and I think there's a couple places where I could have probably gotten that 1 point.
Yeah.
I think it's still close for sure though, because it's like if I do something different, they probably do something different. In addition, it's like I'm exchanging a resource for more of another resource, but it's
Right.
like I might not have that resource at a different point, so it's
Watching that
difficult
game
for
back,
sure.
I thought you actually played like pretty, very, very well. Like
Yeah,
think
I
it's
think there was
tough.
one point that I made a misplay, where basically I could have pouncing paused and like not getting the block value on it, but I could have pouncing paused to transcend a lot earlier than I
Yeah.
ended up transcending. And I think that would have put me decently ahead. But other than that, and I didn't know the end game Zen thing that you can do where you can go Kakara, activate Zen, make a tiger in your hand, and then just not send the tiger and pass, and then you just banish the tiger to their Mask of Recurring Nightmares on their turn.
Yeah.
I did not know about that at all. I think if I did know about that, that would have helped me as well. But I guess I know that for the future at least.
Yeah. It's definitely like a very niche trick, and I don't think it's. Do you think from that, like even if you know that trick, do you think it's like straightforward to win from there, or do you
I
think?
think in that exact position I win. I don't think it necessarily win in every position.
Yeah.
But like they were not. I was at like 14 or 15 life when
Yeah.
they fatigued me.
Yeah.
So I had definitely had a buffer, and if it was 1 point, right, all I need
Yeah.
is one more turn. I don't think they're dealing 15 in one turn.
That's fair.
But or especially with like the context of their hands because they were just drawing a lot of chi.
Right.
But it's definitely still close for sure, and I think it wouldn't have deterministically won me like every CYB new game, but I think in that case it would have been pretty good.
Yeah, definitely a
Mhm.
little bit of room for improvement. But again, I think you overall piloted the deck incredibly well, and I think you should
Yeah,
be pretty proud of your
I
top four
picked up the
finish.
deck 2 weeks ago, so I
Yeah.
felt pretty good
Yeah.
about that.
And you put in a ton of practice. You got like what, at least 100 games probably before that
Uh,
tournament.
I probably more than 100.
More
The
than
issue that I need to just like play on one February list because
Yeah.
I have like 5 lists. They all have like 30 or
30
40
games
games
across.
on them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do like the day before the calling, I played like 30 games on Talishar,
Right.
which is
A
too
lot.
many.
A lot of
Yeah, it's a
games.
lot.
Yeah. I think I was also grinding for that tournament. Yeah. Again, grinding does help, but especially like practice, like different
Yeah,
matchups and stuff.
especially if it's a new deck. I definitely find that just like playing a lot of games.
Yeah.
If you can automatically make all the easy plays, that's really helpful because it means that you can save your mental energy for the hard plays.
Exactly.
Um,
So one thing I guess interesting about your results is that you didn't play into any Zen or any Enigma, which I think your list is actually pretty good into like both in general. So I think it's kind of actually like not a great thing for you. I guess how confident do you feel in like those matchups? I guess.
Yeah, so I think in general, I feel pretty good into Enigma and like 50-50 into the mirror. I think other than that though, I feel like pretty like into decks that aren't MST, I feel very favored. And so I think that kind of makes sense why I did well, where it's like if you're playing an MST mirror, it's kind of a toss up a lot of the time. I
Right.
mean, I think you're still pretty favored into Enigma, but they can definitely high roll you for sure.
Yeah.
Something that I found that was really interesting is for the calling data, over like I don't know exactly how many games it was, but over a lot of games, Zen was actually only 55% into Enigma,
Yeah,
which
it's
makes
definitely a
sense. A
lot
lot of really
closer.
good players, a lot of really good players were on Enigma.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting where it's like if you look at these matchups that are like very coin flippy, it kind of makes sense why you would do well if you're not playing these coin flippy matchups,
Yeah.
where like comparatively you're hitting these matchups which people wouldn't necessarily say are like very deterministically favored, but if you have a matchup that is favored, I think like at the high level, um, whoever is favored, like I feel like ends up coming out ahead a lot of the time,
Yeah.
at like really high levels of play.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely kind of interesting, but again, I think you piloted very well regardless of like the matchup spread. But again, be incredibly proud of your top four finish. You also won the entire city series, which again, I don't know if we talked about the belt, but you won this little wrestling belt from Travis. How long do you get to keep that for? Like a year?
I get to keep it for a year. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully, if I win the next city
Oh, you
series, I
just
get to
keep
keep it
it.
again.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that will happen. We will see.
Yeah.
Um,
And then you also got your calling money from.
oh yeah, 100%. It came in the day of Black Friday, and I bought
Nice.
some shiny,
Oh
shiny
hell
Zen
yeah.
equipment. So
Nice.
yeah,
Memorialize your win. That's pretty sick.
yeah,
Let's talk, I guess, a little bit about cards we kind of like ended up cutting. So I think we kind of briefly mentioned that like weakest link is kind of a little bit weak just in the Zen mirror and also kind of mid into Aurora, just because of like the no blocks and stuff. And I think good Zens generally just try to play around like weakest link CNC anyways. So not incredibly impactful. Let's talk about kind of some of these like two block go against cards. So again, one of kind of like the strengths you talked about was with Zen is being able to just block 6 or block 3 effectively.
mhm,
These cards kind of don't fit into the game plan necessarily, I think is kind of your perspective
yeah.
on.
Generally, what I found is that you can run. So I think that E-Strike's kind of in a similar vein to these cards,
Yeah,
but I think the key difference between these cards and E-Strike is that it blocks 3.
right.
These cards are more efficient, especially with Tiger Tape and Kakara, because
Yeah,
generally Zen wants to be pitching cards. He doesn't want to be putting cards on the bottom unless they're crouching tigers.
yeah,
And so these cards work better with that. However, what I was finding is that I was struggling to have a high enough combo count for Ancestral Harmony
right.
if I was running 6 or more copies of these like kind of red base go again cards.
Yep.
And so overall, I think with the context of my list that's running like Tiger Reflex, etc., I think E Strike made the most the most sense out of these
Yeah.
choices. Um, just because it's a 3 block, and also because in matchups where we're like fat decking and running less blues relative to the total number of cards in our deck,
E-Strike's very good
E-Strike
choice.
unbreaking hands is really important.
Yeah, exactly. I think I was on Growls. At least you kind of convinced me off of them for the calling. I think that was actually like a really good choice. Like the E-Strikes came pretty in handy against like New and Azalea, which are two matchups
Yeah,
that I saw.
I what I found with Growl generally is that if Growl's a 0 for 4, it's great. But generally, if it's going to be a 0 for 4, it's going to be a 0 for 4 because you activated Zen that turn. And I think that if you activated Zen that turn,
You're already winning anyways.
you're already ahead. You're
Yeah.
already winning because you got the best card out of your deck, and you also got free value off of Shuko, or you got free value off of Kakara, just
Exactly.
like becoming an above rate weapon, etc. And so in general, especially, I felt like with the package of a red 2 block, it wasn't necessarily uh as good as just like if you consider all our cards being worth 4.
Yeah.
Especially Growl. I mean, Growl is often worth less than 4, but its ceiling is generally 4.
Right.
Um, if you consider like your opponent sends a CNC at you, if it doesn't hit, it's worth 6. If it does hit, it's worth 9, and
Right.
your cards are worth 4. If I'm not running Growl in my deck, that means that I can block for 3 with a card that was worth 4 and 3 with another card, and then deny. I mean, that's like 1 point of value, but on turns that you're not transcending, it's worth quite a bit more than that because your cards aren't worth 4. Your cards are worth 3 or 2 or what, generally 3. But like, it's denying CNC value. I think is a big thesis of this deck, where it's like you don't want to give your opponent free value on their on hits because that's what makes your opponent's deck good.
Right.
Instead, on the turns that you're not doing the things that your deck does best, you just want to deny your opponent like value that they would generate from like, especially in aggro decks. I think a lot of the time people choose to run more disruptive stuff, or just like stuff with on hits like Snatch or whatever is really
Yep.
great in aggro mirrors because it's like people aren't going to block it because they want to be more aggressive.
Right.
And so I think that having more cards that block effectively in your deck is really nice for aggro mirrors because in the end game you have more cards that block 3. That could potentially make the difference, and then in addition is just better at like stopping on hits, for example.
Yeah, and I think with the defensive package, Zen can almost kind of like pivot to being a defensive deck against like a lot of matchups like Aurora. Like again, I feel like Aurora has to be kind of like the aggressor in that matchup, especially with like kind of the way we built her deck. Let's also kind of talk about some of these blues here. So Snag, I think I was at like a 1 of, but again, I think I swapped that out for like Wax On. I think Wax On in general is just kind of like a better base floor card just because it blocks 3.
Yeah. I think they function very similarly into like Bonds of Agony and Persuasive Prognosis.
Yeah.
I think that Wax On is definitely better into like Leave No Witnesses, etc. It's better into like, I mean, it's marginal. They're both not great, but I do think it's better into like Weakest Link, for example.
Yeah.
I think the biggest reason why you would want to run Snag in your deck is for ratios.
Yeah, like blue count, basically.
Just to run more blues in your deck. But overall, what I was finding is that because Wax On's really good into Aurora, as well as good into New, I wanted to definitely feel like my Aurora matchup was really good, and then making New a little bit less unfavored was less of a priority because I felt like Aurora was going to be a very represented deck.
Yeah. And I think we were also maybe considering like a 1 of blue key unleashed, but again, I think part of one of the reasons like why we swapped this, I think for like a blue pouncing key is just for like to always basically guarantee that Ancestral Harmony like hits a 0 or 1 cost off the top. I think is very powerful to kind of like build your turns around it. Any other comments?
For sure. I think the biggest the other consideration is pouncing key with pouncing pause again enables transcend, which is really nice. But definitely for sure the harmony thing. If you're able to guarantee that if you hit a card off harmony, that's going to cause 0 or 1, that informs like how you play quite a bit, and it lets you take higher value lines that you otherwise either like if you hit a 2 cost and you don't have the resources to play it and you just can't afford to play it because you don't have the resources, that you effectively, it doesn't matter that's a combo card at that point because you're not getting any extra value off of harmony. It's just the same as hitting any card that isn't a combo card if you're not able to play it.
Yeah, exactly. Let's kind of move on and kind of talk about some cards we ended up including. So I think we kind of touched a little bit on all of these. I think spinning is probably like the only card that we haven't really touched on. And I think we've kind of like gotten a little bit back and forth on like whether or not spinning is actually worth including and like what matchups we actually want spinning. What are your kind of thoughts on spinning?
Yeah, so spinning is my least favorite card in this deck. If I could cut spinning, I would. However, I think that spinning is important for a couple reasons. So in a lot of matchups, Zen kind of assumes the like more mid-range or defensive role. But in certain matchups, you can't do that. If you play against Enigma and they play Manifestations of Mirror Guy and you start playing Syncophilos on their Manifestations of Mirror Guy, you're going to lose that game. Because they're just going to keep sending 8 at you. And so what you need is you need cards that have Go Again naturally and don't require you to activate Zen first. And then in addition, you kind of have a decision to make. You can either run Spinning Wheel Kick, which is maybe a little bit worse on rate compared to something like a Flex Claws or Bittering Thorns, but it's a card with combo. And so what I've found is that you play Ancestral Harmony, and it's normally worth like 3 value or whatever. It's usually a Wind Chakra that's like a little bit more modal because you don't need to transcend like right then. It works better with like the Path, Grain, Drop, whatever. But if you do hit a combo card off of it, it's suddenly like the best card. It's like Art of War level almost, where it's like it's 8, 7, 8 value. It can sometimes be even more for one card, and it's just that also enables transcend, which is just like pretty ridiculous. And I think that having that additional high roll potential is definitely pretty nice. And even in matchups where where like you're not necessarily going to be playing Harmony as much, I think that spinning wheel kick, the additional combo capacity, I think especially because it's a card that's 2 durable off Zen that doesn't require a Tiger. Like the comparison between Breed Anger and Spinning Wheel Kick is they're pretty similar. A lot of the time Breed Anger is actually better because you get an additional value off of Shuko. But with Spinning Wheel Kick, you can have some kind of, you can utilize an additional resource and a bottom of Tiger off E-Strike, which you can't do with Breed Anger because the Tiger that you remake off of Breed Anger is in your banish zone, so you can't bottom it to E-Strike.
Yep, exactly. So let's kind of talk about a similar list to ours, which we also saw in the top 8. So this is Cody's list from the Runaways. Again, in kind of our main board, we have a lot of kind of like the usual suspects. I think Cody was also like trimming on like Breed Anger, which is I think a decision I also made, like cut down to 2 Breed Anger. I think you were on 3. I think it's pretty marginal. We see 2 Tiger Eyes, and then we also see like 6 of these kind of like 2-block more aggressive cards, in addition to E-Strike, which is kind of interesting. Blue Key Unleashed is also making kind of an appearance, and I think the most notable part of this list is that we have like the full wax on, wax off package. And I'm kind of proud of this originally because Yellow Wax On was a card that I was initially testing, like 4 wax on to 3 wax off ratio. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see. And this list also kind of performed pretty well, but kind of talk me through, I guess, your kind of opinion on this list and like what you make of some of these choices.
Yeah, so I think this list is really good. I think in theory this list is probably better into Enigma and probably, in my opinion, just like a little bit less consistent into some of the other aggressive decks, where it's like you still definitely have the same high roll potential. And you're probably better into Enigma because you have more ability to clear ward. But I think you can sometimes struggle into aggro mirrors where it's like if you don't draw the best, like you're not drawing a lot of chi early, you're kind of forced to play a little bit of these substandard aggressive hands where it's like, I could block with this growl for 2, but it's just more math for me to send it for 3. But either way, whether I block for 2 or send it for 3, if I'm not transcending, I'm not making a Tiger to get that additional 1 on it, it's still not going to beat my opponent's like Lightning Surge or Snatch or whatever for 4.
Right, exactly.
And then other than that, I think it's definitely reasonable to go lower on combo count for Ancestral Harmony. I think that you kind of lower your ability to high roll with Harmony for sure.
Right.
But if some maybe there's definitely an argument that it's like if Harmony is worth 3, that's fine anyway. Like it's already a blue 3 block, etc. Yeah. Other than that, I think I don't love 3 Cosmic in the sideboard. I think that. Or it's 3 Cosmic in the main deck, especially with E-Strike, just because I think a lot of the time when I'm playing Enlightened Strike, I'm playing Enlightened Strike to draw a card, and I almost never want to Arsenal Cosmic if I can help it. Like there will sometimes be those hands where it's like I E-Strike draw, I draw like a Cosmic or whatever, I end up Arsenaling it because it's like I'm not gonna not Arsenal it. It's just definitely not ideal. And then you draw a double transcend, you block with traverse, and it's like whoops 20. But I think that's definitely the outlier for sure, and I think that's probably going to happen much more often in a list that's running three Cosmic main deck compared to one that's running 1. But obviously he must be doing something right because he second seeded a calling, and he was like he started 7-0 day 1, and I think he was locked going into the last like couple rounds, whereas I had to win it in. So
I think the theory with this deck is that I don't think you want to main board the wax offs because I think that having like a 2-block main deck against a lot of like not like the meta decks, but like just like any kind of deck is like kind of weak just because you know blue 2-block that helps you transcend on your opponent's turn as opposed to your turn is kind of like whatever.
Yeah, you're kind of wasting the Kasaya resource, and then in addition, it's also like it's a 0 block into CNC, which is definitely not great.
Yeah. But I think the goal with this deck is obviously to kind of like switch them out depending on the matchup. So maybe like Cosmics come in. So I'm kind of behind the idea of like not mainboarding wax off. So I definitely kind of like this configuration. We also see kind of like a similar defensive package with like Sync Blows and Foot Clacks. One that all you got's a little bit spicy. I assume that's for like New or the Mirror or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's also probably pretty good into like Aurora because it's like if they have like a big burn up shock turn, you can go like Sync their first 4, or you can go like Traverse Kasaya their first 4. That all you got the second 4, and then like play your Sync on the third, or that all you got on like Starfall, and then play like another Sync on the third 4 or whatever.
Right.
To try and cover the breakpoints really nicely.
Yeah. I think this is like a decent list. And again, I think that some of like the ideas that we were kind of talking about, like also kind of showed up in this list, like Blue Key Unleashed, Tripping
Yeah.
on Breeding, or some of these go against stuff. Like I think there's definitely like arguments both ways, but I think some of it's a little bit like marginal back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, I think their list is a bit more refined in the sense of like running two ofs and one ofs.
Right.
Like I got a lot of games in, but I don't know why I just like really like running two ofs and three ofs if I can help it.
Right.
Where it's like if I want to run this card in my deck, I generally feel like it's a card that I don't mind seeing three of.
Yeah.
But that definitely can be a bit clunky at times, and just like having more specialized uses can give you some potential where it's like, okay, I'm running like one Flick Flack and one That'll You Got and one Wax On, and I'm just like kind of hoping that they line up at the right time, which
Yeah.
I think definitely is a strategy to win a tournament, because you have to get lucky no matter what deck you register. You have to get a little bit lucky if you want to win.
Right. Exactly. But this list doesn't seem like too bad to me. Or it doesn't seem like that far outside the realm of like things that
Yeah,
I consider
and
to be
definitely a
possible.
lot of similar ideas
Yeah,
to what
for
we
sure.
were thinking as
Uh,
well.
any changes I guess you would make to your current CCZN list, maybe for like the upcoming heroes or Jarl, or just any cards that kind of like weren't performing during
Yeah,
the calling?
so I think there's a couple. I have not done a lot of testing for CC. I've been kind of taking a little bit of a break from CC. But I think overall, the biggest things is I would probably want to add at least one or two more blues. I think probably something along the lines of like moving the adding a third cosmic and maybe moving the cosmic that's currently in the main deck into the sideboard.
Yeah.
Because what that means is that into new, when you're cutting six blues, you're putting six blues back in because you're moving three cosmics in, you're moving three warmongers in. I think that's kind
Makes
of a
sense.
similar thought with like Cody's list with the wax offs,
Right.
where it's like you maintain that same blue density, although you are up on cards. You have a slightly lower blue density, but you still have the same number of blue cards, which is
Right.
not too bad. But I'm not entirely sure what I would cut for that at the moment. I felt like the Waxons were good, but it did feel like I was beating Auroras without them.
Right.
So, uh, or I wasn't beating the Auroras necessarily. Like it felt like I probably would have the games that I beat Aurora. It felt very dominant. Like it didn't feel like I won necessarily solely because of Waxon.
Right.
But other than that, I think you don't really need that many more blues for Jarl.
Yeah.
I think if you run like some cosmics, you probably are fine, unless they're on the more aggressive version, which in that case, I think they're probably just worse Victor, although they do have disruption. So I haven't played a ton of games into Jarl. I think with the new heroes, I think we'll just kind of have to see more of them when they come out. What I hope is we get some more like MST stuff out of the game,
Right.
and less just like, oh, the hunted heroes are good because they're just like better MST heroes or
Yeah.
whatever.
I hope
I mean,
so.
I think that'd be hard because Traverse is like pretty broken.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk about, I guess, kind of some of your future plans. So I think you're planning on going to the upcoming calling in Chicago, which is LO.
Yeah. hmm
And have you kind of locked in a deck for that, I guess?
Yeah. Well, my plan was to lock in a deck 3 days ago, and I'm like 90% locked in, but I still need some more games.
Yeah.
But I was looking at Zen. I think Zen's pretty good. I think Zen is very consistent in CC. Like I think Zen, for example, I played Zen, a bit of Zen and Blitz recently, and like Zen and Blitz is so ridiculously consistent because it's
Yeah.
like you just
Super
get to
good.
run 9 Transcend cards in a 40 card deck, and it's like
Yeah.
quarter of your deck is Chi, so you're just gonna draw Chi every game pretty much.
Yep.
But in LL, because of Art of War, you don't get to run as many. Like you draw like E-Strike off of Art of War, and it's like fine or whatever, but it's definitely not nearly as good. And same kind of like with defense reactions.
Yeah.
I think Tiger Eye Reflex gets a lot worse in a format like you block against Chain. You're like, what am I doing?
Right. Exactly.
Um,
I think Zen's a lot
uh,
more of like a combo deck in LL than he is like
yeah,
a
and so
deck.
like he's a good combo deck. He does the thing very well. It's like sometimes you just draw an Art of War and you block with your like armor and they don't have disruption, and then you
You
draw
win the
another
game.
Art of War off
Yeah.
your Art of War and you block with stubbies. It's like whoops, 50 damage out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But I think it's not super. I think it's not nearly as consistent. And I think also with stubbies, like I miss Shuko so much.
Right.
Like Stubbies and Shuko, like in shorter games, Stubbies is like almost assuredly better. But it's like
Yeah.
I just miss being able to go like one into like Zen, grab my Tiger, one, and then send four, and then send five or whatever. And it's just like
Right.
impossible breakpoints for your opponent to block out. But of course, like Stubbies is like usually like 6 to 8 value, or sometimes even more on like the big combo turn.
Yeah.
If you can if you can like
Resolve it.
yeah, if you can resolve it, if you don't get like disrupted out of the game by like Starvo or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I am
or your
actually
opponent just
running.
never attacks you.
I mean, I am actually running Shuko in my LL list, just for like some
Mhm.
of the longer matchups. Like, I think it's pretty good in like CYB Oldhim,
Yeah,
which is a matchup.
I
Like,
agree for sure. Yeah, so at this point, I think I'm pretty locked in on Chain. I think Chain definitely has some weaknesses. I think he probably has a slightly negative matchup into Zen. I need to test that some more. I'll hit you up after
yeah, for sure.
later. But I think you probably are a little bit like you have a little bit of a rough Viscera matchup. Although I think it's pretty draw dependent, and Chain has that kind of similar thing that CYB Oldhim does, where it's like if CYB Oldhim punishes your opponent for playing for like not being super consistent, Chain also does that, where it's like it feels like between turns like 0 and 5, that's your moment to kill Chain. After that point, unless you're like so far ahead where you're able to like kill them, like present a lot of damage through them blocking 3 cards, they're just gonna go like keep 1 card, play like a Seeds from Banish, Chain, throw another attack, creepers out like another non-attack, and send like 15 damage off of like 2 cards.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Chain's very, very
but
strong.
Chain drawing 3 cards is really good.
Yeah.
And also Runeblade is just there's so many Runeblade cards now. Succumb to Temptation in Chain is just like absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
If you because it like nets you an extra point, it's just like so strong. And then in addition, I think that card's really good into the aggro mirrors. Like your Zen opponent blocks the traverse, and then you succumb it, and you
Yeah.
just get to see the light leave their eyes. It's so
Yeah.
great.
Well, any of the new heroes kind of like spark your interest? I think the Jarl deck is out by now. I think I
Yeah,
messed around with it.
Jarl's really cool. I don't know. I think I really like Guardian as a class.
Yeah.
But there's so many people already playing Jarl in Portland right now, where it's like I think I probably could win a lot of Jarl mirrors, but I don't necessarily think it's like super interesting. If anything, I'd like play Betsy to try and like win the Guardian mirrors.
That'd be
Um,
interesting. I think she
that would be
probably
interesting.
does
Yeah,
pretty
Betsy's
well.
really good in the Guardian mirrors. The only struggle you have is if they break your tectonic, it's kind of an issue.
Right.
But then if they do that and they ever give you a frostbite on their turn, then that turns on an Othos anyway, so it's like not even necessarily that big of a
Yeah.
deal. Betsy like traditionally just like really good in the Guardian mirrors because like Victor can't really run that many defense reactions in his list because of the block cards.
Right.
And the difference between Betsy and Bravo is that Betsy can overpower CNC, which is really good. And then the other thing that Betsy can do that Bravo can't is that when you send like a Dominated Crippling Crush, you have to block 8 of it. When
Right.
you send like an overpowered like Spinal or Bet Big or Drink One of the Table or whatever, it's actually harder to block out because you have to block out the entire thing rather than a crush effect. And then in addition, a lot of the time, Betsy's better at playing smaller hands. Um, so, you
Yeah.
know, well, that was kind of a Betsy side tangent,
Yeah,
but
you're good.
Betsy very good in the Guardian Mirror. Other
Right.
than the new heroes, it's like I still have a lot of heroes in CC that I want to try out that
Yeah.
I just haven't really gotten an opportunity to. So generally, the way that I kind of think about the new sets is it's like I'll think about the new sets when they come out.
Right. I'm kind of similar. Like I've not
Yeah.
started brewing for Syndra or Fang or anyone
hmm
yet.
Where it's like there's already so many other heroes that I haven't gotten a chance to play with that I can play with right now that I'd rather just kind of think about those rather than like theorizing about heroes that I can't play.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk, I guess, about kind of like the overall like meta game. Like, I think that MST heroes are like incredibly strong right now. Are there any kind of changes that, like, if you had reigns of LSS, that you would kind of make to the game, or like, do you think that there's any kind of like problems with the meta, or do you think the meta is fine? Like, walk us through
Yeah,
kind of your
so
thoughts.
I think there's a couple. I think there's kind of an argument that you can make, which is that it's just going to solve itself.
Yeah.
I think the issue, I think like if we just like waited 6 months, I mean, this is kind of what LSS did like a year ago with Lexi,
Right.
which is just like they just kind of let her LL.
Yeah.
If we just like waited 6 months, I think Zen and Enigma would probably be gone between another ProQuest season, another RTN season.
Yeah.
But I
That's
think
true.
those 6 months would not be super enjoyable.
Yeah.
Just because like I think the meta right now is really good. The quality of games are really good, but just like Traverse is just such an obscenely powerful card.
Right.
Just simply because like Traverse basically like the these decks are like really powerful and they have really good numbers, but they're more prone to bricking than other decks in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like they kind of have the Runeblade problem where it's like if you don't draw like certain sequences of cards, you have like some of the lowest number value hands in the game. And what
Right.
Traverse does is it basically says like one turn, rather than playing a card game where there's consistency, you just are playing chess where it's like I automatically get to have one really powerful turn.
Right.
And a lot of the time, since your opponent's still playing a card game where they can get unlucky, if
Yeah.
they get unlucky on the turn that you like
Get
remove
lucky.
all variance from the equation, it's just
Yeah.
like the game's over because you've
Right.
swung with Mirror Guy 3 times and they just like can never clear it because they have to like start blocking cards on Mirror Guy or
Yeah.
whatever.
It's wild
Um,
that Mirror Guy is probably one of the best cards in CC, at
yeah,
least right now.
so it's so good.
Yeah.
It did not need to be a blue.
Right. It
I
being
mean,
it being a blue, it being an instant, like it coming in for 8, like a lot of different things that I feel like they could
yeah,
have done better.
a blue that swings for 8 with go again is just
Wild.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tegan also wants you to unban Skeletor. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that.
I think yeah, I think Viscera is already like
Probably
I
one
think
of the
there
top
was
5 decks right now.
yeah, like I think there was maybe an argument that Viscerai or that like you could unban Skeletor before Rosetta came out, but like after Rosetta coming out, I just feel like there's no way. I I wish Skeletor was a card that we could unban. Do I wish that? I
I
think
don't
I
know
wish
if
that
works
before
for me.
Rosetta. I now don't.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah, well, I think that about kind of wraps up the interview. I guess, is there anything that you kind of want to mention before we go? I did want to quickly mention that Jude has his own channel, so if you want to go check him out, I think he's the Judester on YouTube. I
Mhm.
think you also have Blue Sky, but I don't think you really post on that.
Not too much, no.
Yeah, so check him out on YouTube. He's got like a full tournament report. So again, we kind of went into like a high level overview of a lot of the games, but he goes into like depth on each like turn and stuff like that in some of in that video specifically. But yeah, any kind of like last comments about Zen or about anything kind of before we wrap up?
Not too much. I just want to say, if you're picking up Zen, don't be afraid to block.
Yeah.
The deck blocks like quite well, and because like the longer the game goes, you're gonna get more value off of Shuko and just like Chi getting shuffled back up to the top. Like once you start drawing pre-flip Chi, it's like almost even better numbers than like transcending and get free resources off Kasaya, because a lot of the time you have to play inefficiently to like get the Chi flipped, etc.
Yeah.
The deck blocks really well. Especially my list. I think most Zen lists block like surprisingly well.
Yeah.
But I think especially with all the Tiger reflexes and E strikes and 4 blocks and stuff like that, the deck blocks especially well.
Yeah, I think you're kind of correct with that. That Zen just has one of the strongest blocking abilities in the game, while also just sending efficient damage and having this really good late game kind of cycle where you get like just really efficient turns. Yeah, but thank you for being on the channel. Again, if you want to go check out Jude, I'll put a link to his channel in the description. You can go check out his tournament report. And thank you for coming on. We still owe you those hunted packs for the the last interview we tried to do, but we'll get those to you when we come back in February.
Mhm.
All right, cool.
All right. Well, hopefully I'll be back here soon. Hopefully Chicago goes well. Although I do not have any expectations after this last couple weekends, because Portland was amazing. It was great because it was like a 15-minute drive.
Yeah, it was
I didn't
fantastic.
even have to fly anywhere.
Oh yeah, the calling was incredibly well run. So shout out to Travis and everyone for facilitating that. Cool. I think we'll wrap it up there. Well, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all next time.